Society has become more aware of post-traumatic stress disorder, especially those suffered by first responders who serve the downtown east side. We're getting better at providing healing services to these heroes. But what about the people who live those tragedies every day and those who support them? Must be submerged in PTSD. When I've asked women in the downtown east side which groups make a real difference to their lives, they invariably mention WISH. Our next guest leads the team who was there well before and well after our first responders. Please welcome Mebrat Beyene.
In the mid-1990s, women were starting to go missing from the downtown east side. Now, women in the community knew this was happening. Frontline workers knew this was happening. Women's organizations knew this was happening. And I still vividly remember being really new to Vancouver and hearing, and just still even learning who the women's organizations were and who the women advocates were in the city. And hearing very early on that 1995 in particular was a harrowing year where so many women went missing and no attention was being paid to it. And that it wasn't being taken seriously, that perhaps most of these women were on a bender, they're out partying, they'll show up, they always do. At the time, folks knew about a pig farm out in Port Coquitlam, where parties took place and where women were brought from the downtown east side to what was known as Piggy's Palace, and everyone knew about it. And folks knew that women were being assaulted there and disappearing from there. By the time that I had learned about this, I was shocked that I hadn't heard about it already. And being a feminist and somebody who cared tremendously about women's health and safety, I was shocked that I didn't know about it. I assumed that it was because I was living back east in Montreal at the time and that perhaps the news had remained regional. To my horror, to discover that no, it wasn't a big story here either. And how could so many women go missing in such a short amount of time with so little media coverage and so little attention to it? It took years for law enforcement and mainstream media and the community to recognize what was actually happening and to recognize that there was a serial murderer who was preying on women in the downtown east side. It took 7 years before that serial murderer was charged with the first of many murders, and it ultimately took 12 years before he was sentenced to life in prison. 67 women went missing. They were all poor. Most were homeless, mostly struggling with substance use issues, mental health issues. Many were Indigenous, and many were street-based sex workers. 67 women whose lives and whose violent deaths were ultimately forsaken, who suffered targeted violence that we as a society ultimately allowed to happen with impunity. That this group of women was perhaps a group of women whose lives and whose deaths wouldn't be missed and whose deaths wouldn't spark widespread public outrage. And that's, in fact, what happened. So 6 years ago, the report of the Missing Women Commission of Inquiry was released. It was called Forsaken. And Forsaken outlined the failures that resulted in the missing and murdered women here in Vancouver. And it also outlined recommendations, both short-term and long-term, to ensure, or to hopefully ensure, that nothing like that could, would, or should ever happen again. So here we are, 6 years later. Has anything changed? Can we say that women are safer? Can we say that stigma for this group of women has reduced? My fear is that our collective memory is short. My fear is that the violence that this group of women face on a daily and nightly basis still goes largely, it's still invisible to most of us, particularly those of us outside of the downtown east side. And that's shocking, and it's frightening. It's common for sex workers to wonder not if they're going to suffer violence, but rather when and to what degree. So this is why WISH exists. I first learned about WISH when I moved to Vancouver about 17 years ago, and I was shocked that an organization like this even existed. I was amazed by the reputation that it had and how much of a frontline organization it was, how well respected it was in the community, and the work that it does. So for 34 years, WISH has operated in the downtown east side as a safe haven for self-identified women in street-based sex trade. The vision of WISH is that every woman should have access to opportunities to make safe, healthy, and positive choices. And those are really key. We're always talking about access, opportunities, health, and choice, rather. But why sex workers? Why a particular focus on sex workers? So street-based sex work is the most dangerous form of sex work. It's also the form of sex work that has the least amount of choice and the highest vulnerability. I've now been executive director at WISH coming on to 3 years this summer. The longer that I work at WISH, the longer that I listen and learn and listen some more, what is clear to me is that if we are not specifically focusing on what is happening for street-based sex workers, we are missing entire levels of what women's condition and women's status looks like. So much like the 67 women who went missing and were murdered, what we're really talking about are issues of poverty, homelessness, substance use issues, mental health care access, lifelong trauma, targeted violence. We're also talking about a gross overrepresentation of Indigenous women, which we know is a direct and very real, very present impact of colonization, residential school system, the 60s scoop, and a very present, very deep systemic racism and discrimination. These are significant issues that have a very direct impact on women's ability to make free, healthy, and safe choices. And at WISH, we recognize that some women have chosen sex work and are doing so safely, happily, proudly. We also recognize that there are women who are resorting to street-based sex work, and that given more choices, more opportunities, and more income, would most likely choose another option. So at WISH, we recognize the strength, the resilience, the dignity, and the beauty of women who survive as warriors, and often with humor, with a deep sense of community and sisterhood. So at WISH, we recognize that sex work is work, so we provide women with very immediate frontline supports and services that happen on a 365-night-year basis. We look at community capacity building. We look at deeper engagement. And as Sam was mentioning, we also do this in the midst of an opioid crisis, a poverty crisis, and a homelessness crisis that is not abating. And our staff, here they are, this is actually about a quarter of us, we do this with a passion and a dedication that I can confirm is not because of the pay. We are absolutely committed to women's health and safety, and I'm so proud to call these women my coworkers and to work alongside them. And this is work that we will continue to do until violence against women and violence against sex workers is no longer tolerated, and we will continue to do this work until women have access to opportunities to make healthy, free, positive choices. Thank you.